Hello, and welcome to the Mush Love Podcast. I'm your hesitant host, Tim Keck. The Mush Love Podcast is a series of discussions with the most interesting and knowledgeable people in the world of mushrooms. Today's topic is death and mushrooms, specifically how psilocybin-aided therapy can play a powerful role in the lives of people as they prepare for death. We also will discuss the legal fight to make this valuable therapy available to the people who need it the most. Mushrooms have long been associated with death. After all, they live off dead things. Mushrooms, like animals, can't directly harness the sun's energy like plants do in photosynthesis, so they eat dead stuff. But there are other reasons as well. Mushrooms are often bone white, they rise from the earth in the dead of the night, and eating poisonous mushrooms can quite literally kill you. And the list goes on and on. But most applicable to what we're discussing today, there's a profound experience that can happen when people trip on mushrooms, when people take big trips on mushrooms, a dissolution of the sense of self called ego death. And this ego death is one of the good reasons people are using psilocybin-aided therapy to prepare themselves for death. Michael Pollan discusses this deeply in his book from a few years back, How to Change Your Mind. When I first read that book, I really wanted more on the fun tripping stuff and not so much on the depressing end-of-life stuff. But now that I've gone a little deeper in my interest in all things mushrooms, I've discovered that this profound effect on people who are dealing with death tells us a lot about mushrooms and ourselves. And now, over time, there's been peer-reviewed studies on people who've had this type of therapy, and the results are no less than astounding. And it's not really surprising. We already know that psilocybin-aided therapy has shown to help people with anxiety, depression, and it helps people connect and open their minds to new ways of thinking. In this episode, we talk to practitioners about their firsthand experience with psilocybin-aided therapy. I first talked with Sunil Agarwal. Dr. Aggarwal is perfectly suited to discuss this topic. At Berkeley, he got a BS in chemistry as well as a BA in philosophy. Then he recognized his calling to become a physician, receiving both a PhD and MD at the University of Washington. He is deeply interested in integrative and cross-cultural medicine. And since 2020, he's been working incredibly hard to find a way for patients in palliative care, a medical approach focusing on quality of life and mitigating suffering, to legally obtain psilocybin. He has brought this fight all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court. I asked him about the history of this medicine and why he is working so hard to make it available to his patients. Welcome, Sunil.
So great to be here. Thank you.
To start off, I'd like you to describe broadly what palliative and hospice care are and how psilocybin might be beneficial to your patients.
Certainly. Well, hospice care is very old, and it's the idea of caring for folks, patients who are dying, terminally ill. Comes from really like a old medieval tradition, I think, in Europe. Hospices where you would be on pilgrimage or you'd get care from religious orders and tend to your wounds. Palliative is a kind of arose out of the hospice practices. It means to cover or to cloak, palliare. And so, covering up a wound or helping ease a patient's suffering. If you cannot cure a condition, how can you improve quality of life, relieve symptoms, relieve suffering? So palliative and hospice care became formalized as a field in the United States, a couple of decades ago. But it's part of a much longer tradition that humans have been doing anywhere we deal with, maladies that are difficult that we can't cure or treat.
And it had kind of a religious connotation, particularly in the European setting.
Yeah, it started in those kinds of places, I think, and to this day, many places, organizations that service for the end of life often involves. You can say spiritual too. Actually, the hospice benefit that Medicare provides is the only place in the United States where they require you to have spiritual care available to patients. So it's really tied into that because death and dying is very much a core piece of spiritual and religious care and practice. So yeah, I think it's a great field, and I'm happy to be a certified member of it. And I think it's a growing field in medicine, I would say, and nursing, and it's very interdisciplinary. Involves social workers, chaplains, nursing, doctors, and hopefully public health over time as we start to understand these concepts much more broadly. So the use of psychedelics, entheogens, whatever you want to call them, to help with palliative care is a very hot topic in our field today, and there's lots of that's sort of set off by the emerging clinical trials that have been being done at U.S. Academic centers like UCLA and NYU and others, and they've been showing these tremendous benefits for helping ease some of the demoralization that occurs in patients when they are diagnosed with serious illnesses, their desire for hastened death, their thoughts, their hopelessness. There's all kinds of dimensions that they've looked at, and after they've given patients a psilocybin-assisted session, in these cases, these are all psilocybin studies, they're really, these results kind of kept lasting, and sometimes patients live a lot longer than they were told earlier on, and who knows if that has anything to do with it or not. We certainly know that good palliative care can improve potentially survival in addition to quality of life while you're alive. So even after a year, we see enduring benefits in patients with advanced cancers, on the emotional side, which is fantastic. And that's kind of why palliative care field wants to integrate psilocybin, I think, into its practices. And there's lots of, growing movement.
And it seems like there's more openness to it in that sector. And is it part of it that it has a spiritual aspect to it? Why do people feel more okay with end of life care with hallucinogens than they would in for a high school kid who has depression, for instance?
Yes, that's a good question. I was just talking to my colleague yesterday. He's a palliative care chaplain in the Swedish system, and yeah, we think, it's really this field where we are tending to folks who are going on this final journey, and at least whatever this plane of life is. There's a lot of letting go of attachments that has to occur if you are kind of in those last weeks or months of life, and that's sort of a natural inward process. It's also we're focusing a lot on the interior consciousness, well-being, existential well-being. How do you feel about just being present now and enjoying whatever moments you have? So there's a much more sensitivity to those very internalized experience as you draw inward and let go of attachments. And the psychedelic substances, or hallucinogens, this old word, which really is a misnomer. It means hallucination is like a false. It's like, oh, that's not real. It's a false perception, and that's how you take a substance and you're experiencing other things. Those aren't false. They're an internal experience that's true. Right. It's a true experience, and that's grounded in neurological activity and.
We access the world through our mind anyway, right? And so what's true or not?
Right. It's just kind of this funny thing that we started to say, well, that's not really there. You're saying, I don't see that, so right. You're having a false experience. But anyway, this term entheogen is actually another term that was coined in 1979, and it has even a broader than psychedelic, because it refers to a much longer tradition in spiritual practices and religions around the world. Right. And it is a more and more understanding that entheogens have been used at different transition points in cultures, including at death, including coming of age, even in other stages of life. So I think it's about assisting in that process of adaptation to a changed scenario. In this case, dying. That this life as you know it, your sense of self and ego, and whatever this is, it's going to change in some unknown, mysterious way. And here's a substance that also temporarily alters your default mode and your sense of being, and you return back. But it's such a profound experience. And there's a really good book, Immortality Key, that's come out recently in the last couple of years, New York Times bestseller, Brian Marescu. And he talks about the fact that this is kind of if you die before you die, then you won't die when you die. It's some old ancient Greek or pre-Hellenistic idea. And their idea was like, you have to have an experience like that, and that will prepare you for death, And there was all these mystery cults where they incorporated those kinds of things, like the Eleusinian mysteries and things like that. So I think, and then he goes back to even ancient Turkey. There's an old place called Göbekli Tepe, which is an ancient temple.
Yeah.
And there they had like some kind of like cemetery or graves. There's lots of like human remains, and there was evidence of making beer there, you know.
Yeah.
And so there's probably some correlation between mind activating substances and being around death as maybe in a ritualized way to honor the dead, but also maybe to be closer to death.
So when you talk to a patient for any of these kind of reasons who might be a good candidate for psilocybin, what kind of I'm sure it's all over the board of kind of responses, but are people shocked, or are they like what like how do people, are these mostly people who have tripped in the past, or is it this is the first time in their lives, or can you kind of like maybe take us down that road a little bit?
Certainly. I mean, first of all, in my clinic, I practice in the United States and then Washington State, where we don't have any legal access to psilocybin for any reason. It's different. If I was just across the border in Canada, there's a special access program I could or even get an exemption and have my patients receive psilocybin. So here, you know, it's really, that's part of why I formed the case with the DEA.
Exactly.
But we certainly talk about it because patients get access to psilocybin elsewhere, you know, and that's part of we can give harm reduction information and counsel. And we have other psychedelic substances like ketamine that we are able to provide. But in the general idea that psychedelics may help me with my condition, whether it's a palliative condition, or we also take care of mental health patients in our clinic as well. It's like in the common knowledge now.
Right.
It is not a rarefied, it's not a, it doesn't take me to say that. Like certainly patients may not know what the options are, but the idea that psychedelic substances could do something helpful it feels, at least in the patient population that come to an integrative clinic in Seattle area, thanks to news and media and over the years and years, I think we're really at a place now where people already sort of get that, but they don't get how it's going to happen, you know?
Right. Like the actual mechanics of what it is. How much to take, or
exactly, and where to get it, how to do it. But I understand it can be good. It sounds like there's something there,
right.
But I don't really, you know. So we've already versus maybe 10 years ago, it would be like, well, I would never do anything like that. That sounds like that's going to destroy my brain.
So you feel like in the last decade, there's just a change in perception by people
Yeah,
broadly.
I do, because of these state laws and, you know, decriminalization efforts. I think that's a marker for that. And I would say also certainly this work in the palliative world, hospice and palliative world, where we've seen these studies make front page news. And, you know, MDMA for PTSD is also very front page news. So yeah, I do feel like there's certainly still there are people out there who are naive, and then there's people who, I had experience decades ago, and now, you know, and they're like, now I'm kind of reopening. There's something new here.
Yeah.
So those are I think make it easier. And so talking to patients about this is like, well, yeah, there is something there. Here's what some of the science and evidence that we have is, and here's what the limits of what we know and don't know, and, you know, how to think about risk and safety and other safety issues is really a lot of conversation. And then, you know, when we have access to psilocybin, it will be talking about how to use that in a therapeutic context.
In talking to patients who have used psilocybin for this, what kind of reports back are you getting?
Well, you know, it seems in general there's, you know, just kind of what you'd expect. Patients report lifting of mood that lasts for quite a significant time. There's people will use psilocybin in, you know, macro, meso, or micro, like, you know, high, medium, low, and there's different protocols and strategies and approaches. So, I mean, I would say there's been a lot of interest in the microdosing movement, even though we have less evidence in terms of like clinical studies that show this enduring effect. But I think there's definitely
better evidence on the medium and the high,
or
just the high?
Medium and high. Yeah, I would say medium and high. And I don't even know, I say the medium and high distinction, but most things are medium.
Right.
Studies like,
it's not like the high is like, you know, like a heroic dose.
Those kinds of things. But then there's, and all of those, you know, people are starting to say, well, not all, if you're dealing with fungal psilocybin, right, not all mushrooms produce psilocybin at the same concentration.
Right.
There's like variation in that, and that's where we need like testing in labs so people understand that the psilocybin from this sort of cubensis was different from the azurescens, is different from this other strain and variety, because a lot of people will base these strengths on grams of dried mushroom, but
Right.
if you're dealing with mushrooms of wildly different concentration, it's
and age even, right? Older mushrooms, right? Depends on.
That's right.
Compared to a fresh mushroom,
right. That's exactly right. So that's a lot of but in the clinical trials, we're using chemical psilocybin in general. There is a company now that's making filament that has made fungal. I think is it filament? Yeah, them. And then there's another one. I'm blanking on their name right now in Vancouver area. These Canadian companies that have made psilocybin in a fungal product, and so some of the trials are now going to utilize that, so sort of whole fungal extract rather than a pure chemical psilocybin.
Because there could be more complex properties.
There's psilocin and even psilocin, of course, and psilocybin are two of the known chemicals. But then some mushrooms have MAO inhibitors like HARMA alkaloids, which may have a synergistic effect as well in terms of the boosting up this is a whole other layer of pharmacology that listeners might have heard of something called ayahuasca.
Sure.
Ayahuasca is sort of famously, and there's many potential ayahuascas around the world too. This combination of one serotonin-like compound, in this case DMT, and psilocybin is very similar, has similarity to DMT. And then you combine it with a MAO inhibitor, HARMA alkaloids, like in Syrian rue or in Banisteropsis caapi, which is the South American vine. And that sort of makes the body take up more potently orally the serotonin-like molecules. So you can have like a booster.
Right.
So some mushrooms already have those baeocystine alkaloids, all kinds of different things. So it is not, this is nature. This is not, Merck, this is Mother Nature. It's like chemical diversity. So
and we don't have a great, just because until kind of recently, there hasn't been the studies, right? So we don't know.
Yes, exactly. And even now, I know one colleague that's growing mushrooms under DEA license, Dr. Cicely in Arizona, and I think she was told by DEA, I think you just need to grow this one variety, like cyanescence. It was like that was all they really wanted her to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
it's a good mushroom.
Sure, but there's 200 other ones out there. You're a researcher. It's like, let me just you could just look at that part of the night sky. If you want a telescope, look at that part. I always think about you need to have wide freedom because this is nature again. But anyway, it's very nice.
And if you're going to be serious about having the most beneficial use, you want to see what the varieties are and what's good and what's not.
And should we use fruiting bodies or can we use mycelium? There's some mushroom varieties that you can you make psilocybin in without having to go to fruiting. Right. It's just in the mycelium, which may have a better stability, long life to it, and so there's lots of innovations that will be hopefully forthcoming. So,
and how about the downsides? Have you heard reports from patients of the negative aspects of it?
Well, everybody's been hearing about the downsides of psilocybin since 1960 something.
It's a lot of people jumping out of buildings, right? It's just mostly you jump out of a building.
Right. I mean, that's just so it's clear. I mean, there certainly is a long, multi-decades of worry and concern around psychosis in individuals that were not stable or ready or had very difficult experiences and didn't properly have support for preparation or integration. And those are downsides, and those are, some of that was exaggerated, some of it was not, and it's I think that we are dealing with a substance that has potentially strong effects, and so if you're not well prepared or you have other conditions that might get exacerbated, like really you're on borderline mania or psychosis predispositions, those kinds of risks that's why screening is really important. So first I just want to say, and everybody knows those risks. In fact, that's why we have agreed to put people in jail for this for so long, is because we're so worried about those risks, and everybody sort of knows about that. But really, it turns out in most of the general population who don't have those things, you don't tend to see those kinds of issues, especially if you have good preparation and obviously a safe the substance is pure. The medical side of things, physical health issues that have more recently arisen are concerns around certain individuals who may have arrhythmias or heart conditions where psilocybin may not be safe for them. And we're still trying to understand who those groups are and how to sort of select and screen for those. But this is one of the concerns about regular use versus intermittent use and things like that.
And do you feel like that it's getting treated differently than other drugs possibly would be, that maybe that was by a large pharmaceutical?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, psilocybin, Timothy Leary and all the politics of psychedelics created a stigma.
Yeah.
And it's people can't spell the word right. You can look around. It's very hard to just keep
There's
it straight.
There's an E in it. I think that's one that throws.
Well, psilocybin doesn't have an E, actually.
No, it's the psychedelics.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Oh, right.
But the way I spell, maybe.
Right. No, psychedelics, that word and the whole thing there's a stigma. I do think, Australia has legalized medical use, and it's still a slow process. But those kinds of things internationally are also impacting that. I was mentioning Canada as well, Jamaica, Holland. So it's going. This is sort of a process of unfolding that's occurring, and then not to mention the fact that existing traditional indigenous cultures that have utilized psilocybin for centuries, are still around. They didn't go away, like the Mazatec people.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. That's the religious freedom for medicine aspect of it, and that argument.
Yeah.
So can you kind of bring everybody up to speed a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, entheogens is this old word for these substances that refers to things that occasion the divine within. This is the term is used like this because psilocybin and such substances have been part of spiritual and religious traditions around the world for probably prehistory. We have like cave paintings and things like that, with mushroom figures and mushroom stones and various Mesoamerican cultures, and there's different indications from different world religions that psilocybin or some psychedelic soma, in South Asian traditions, or haoma in Zoroastrian traditions, or there's so many different things. So some kind of psychedelic sacrament has been part of human history around cross-culturally. And so we still have to this day in the United States, especially in the indigenous populations, but also people that they have touched and influenced, practices involving entheogens. And the one that everyone's probably familiar with is mescaline. The mescaline containing cactus, Lophophora willamsia, or peyote, that required a act of Congress to create a legal framework for the tribes, the Native American church, actually, to utilize that sacrament in their healing ceremonies, which they call medicine. And the Indian Health Service, which is a federal health program, reimburses a patient to go out to their medicine man and have a mescaline ceremony. You can submit that and get your money back, because that's how integrated it is into the traditional medicine system in the United States. So this is a religious practice that's under sort of auspices of religious freedom that is recognized as part of the health and well-being of a Native American, Indian Health Service patient. So, but all of that was very hard fought. I mean, it was a multiple, like you can look at histories in the 50s and earlier of just raids on reservations of, peyote ceremonies. I mean, that goes back to like the conquistadors also, right. And with mushroom ceremonies and the Inquisition and everything like that. But then even into the 20th century, there was when there was a revival of the peyote way, which started in El Reno, Oklahoma in the early 20th century. They founded this church. It was the first time the word Native American was actually used in a national way. My understanding was the Native American church. Everything up and that was Indian. Oklahoma was Indian country. I'm from Oklahoma, so I was born and raised there, and I know, I had teachers in school that were part of that peyote way. It's part of their way of life. Anyway, so it spread through the Plains Indians, and then after this case in Oregon, they made it illegal. And then
I'm sorry, this case in
Smith versus forgot the details of the case, but there was a gentleman who worked for the state of Oregon in the 90s, and they had him test your urine drug screen, and he tested positive for mescaline because he had attended one of these ceremonies, and he lost his job, and so he sued and went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you guys did the right thing. You got the drug war to deal with, and he broke the law, even though it was his religious, he's part of a tradition that predates the Supreme Court and everybody else, going back for so long, and so.
Just the wrong religion.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. If he had drank wine at his communion the night before or whatever, that would have been fine because, and we have tons of exemptions and laws all over on alcohol use because it is a much more mainstream religion. But
during alcohol prohibition, you could take sacraments, right? In churches. Right?
Yeah. They had medical and religious exemptions for alcohol in prohibition. And we actually still have those laws on the books in Washington to this day. Yeah. So alcohol has always been, this exceptions made because people recognize that there's people believe that it could stand for the blood of the deity. You're close to God that way. That's the same way that natives talk about the flesh. Like teonoctol is a traditional word for mushrooms, and it means flesh of the gods.
Yeah.
It's literally the same phraseology. Instead of flesh, it's blood. Instead of blood, it's flesh. But that's a traditional. I think that's Aztec name for mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. So it's like kind of that's an emerging. I just wanted to explain to folks that we did, despite all these pressures, we were able to get this law passed, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which included this language that protected the Native American use of peyote, and then later on, there was a Supreme Court case out of Oregon that protected the use of there was a Supreme Court case out of New Mexico that protected the use of ayahuasca in a offshoot religion that comes from the Brazilian Amazonian practice. Ayahuasca I mentioned earlier is another traditional entheogen. And then in Oregon, there was another case that applied to a different church that also protected them in a federal court. So three major federal case precedents for the use of psychedelic substances. I think there are more than 3 religions in the United States. This is the thing. Like, right. If this is true for these religions, is it true for religion in general? Is it true for humanity in general? And that's sort of that this begs this question. You can't, because these are all exemptions to public health laws. They get exemptions like you don't have to card your members of your congregation when you ask them to drink wine. You don't say, "Oh, yes, you may take the blood of Christ. How old are you?
Right.
Let me look at your license."
You'll take the flashlight.
Right. No, nobody does that. They just say, "All right, we can do this." The state respects and trusts us to sort of be safe here because they don't want to infringe on our freedom to be close to God in the way that we think is right. And I think that's a good thing. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, but it should happen for everybody and everyone's idea of God as long as you're not harming other people. And that's sort of, so we have these exemptions in the law. It's other interesting exemptions too, like folks who are Amish do not have to sign up for Medicare. Like, even though everybody else is required to get on Medicare, it's a federal program, but they don't want to be in touch with all those bureaucracies, and they sometimes have prohibitions against electricity and things like that. So we give protections to the Amish folks. We give protections to Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't have to have emergency blood transfusions, whereas other folks may have to do that. So all of that is like. I want to see a system where we sort of universalize these kinds of, for all religions, any kind of, if there's a substance that's part of your practice, it doesn't even have to be formalized. Religion could be how you own, your own way of, your own solo idea of how to connect with the divine or something higher. And in medicine and public health, we believe that everybody has a spiritual and existential health access. It doesn't have to be part of any kind of religion, but that's as important to that individual's physical health, as important as physical health and mental health, emotional health is spiritual health.
And you can never say, I would imagine most people who've had an experience with psilocybin feel like it's a spiritual experience, right? Like it's hard to not go there.
You can't not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're disrupting this default mode. It's you get in touch with these different sense of the world and perception, and there's big survey studies that are showing that people have that sense. They also seem to maybe even have. There's a recent study that improves your sense of theory of mind, like the idea that there can be other minds out there in the world, your sense of a nature relatedness. These are like large survey studies where we ask thousands and thousands of people who've had psychedelic experience. It could be beyond just psilocybin, but there is clearly something at that level of cognition or awareness which we call spiritual or existential, that we are. So it's that we are turning, that we are potentially adding to or changing. And so it is natural to think that this could have a role to play in what people might consider religious freedom, the primary religious experience, if that's sort of a core thing. And that's why we have this word entheogens. Entheogens just exist in the world. There are things that people do, and not just people, like maybe even animals too, who knows, that where they kind of disrupt their default mode and maybe have a as we were talking about, tied into death, tied into rebirth, tied into coming of age, tied into different forms of healing. The Native American church still calls peyote a medicine. It's a healing journey, even though it's not regulated by the FDA, who makes approved medicines. But for them, medicine has a larger meaning than what's dispensed at the pharmacy. So that's why I think it's in my mind, I would like to see a public health, a sort of a larger provision where it's not just your religion. Oh, you have to tell the state, oh, that's a legitimate religion or not. Because right now the FDA, the DEA says, write to us and tell us what your religion is if you think you have a religious exemption. And we'll take a look at it. And, your on the beat cop has a degree in religious studies or something. No, they don't. And it's kind of a very unusual situation that we're faced with. And so we have to ask the question, is this a part of what we would consider religious freedom, or is it not? And this is where you do have to grapple with questions like, well, how come we have alcohol as a sacrament? And not these other religions, like, Rastafarians have claimed cannabis as a sacrament, and, many groups have claimed various sacraments, but their versions of spiritual practice don't get as much shrift. They get short shrift. So I'm kind of me being an Okie from Muskogee, but also being a South Asian, grew up in a Hindu household. I was always sensitive to this idea. Okay, well, this is a religious practice, and on the soma I was telling you about, it's probably a psychedelic sacrament. That's part of the traditions that I was handed down, but I couldn't really practice that. Not that I really understood much about it as a kid, but looking back, I think it would be very natural to think, okay, well, maybe there's something. Or maybe I should go and seek out what people think soma is. And there's lots of papers that it was a mushroom sacrament. There's one theory that it was some kind of ayahuasca combination. But, just as the person next to me wants to seek out their idea of Christian, of God, and maybe seek out different wines, in different churches or other types of, there's a snake handling religion in the South, where they take snake venom and strychnine, and that's part of their religious practice. If that's what everybody should do what they want within their religious ambit, and the government only job is to be the least restrictive. They don't want to burden you, and that's
right. And it's not as if alcohol is like this incredibly benign drug that you right. It's not like,
is it 80,000 dead a year, or is it 40? It's under 100,000, but yeah, it is a killer, and not that ceremonial use is not the killer.
Right.
It's the non-ceremonial.
It's the wafers. It's the wafers that get you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's the killer. So.
Oh yeah, and I have some there's I mentioned this book Immortality Key, and it turns out Brian Marescu did a lot of research, archaeological research and classics research, and there's serious scholars who think that the Paleo-Christianity, the early Christian Eucharist, may have been a continuation of a Hellenistic era psychedelic sacraments, that really was the first Eucharist. It wasn't just sort of wine made from grapes, that there was maybe other psychedelic substances.
You have to have we discussed before the feeling of awe, right? And with psychedelics, you have this feeling of awe that matches, of course, it's this transcendent experience.
Yes,
right?
Awe. That's right. Awe is a big deal, and it's wonderful. There's actually new research coming out on awe all the time now in psychology. That awe is this functional thing that we have that actually opens you up, makes you more receptive to new ideas, and can also increase your well-being and also compassion. So awe is really important. And actually, I think it was William James. He was a famous Harvard psychologist, in the turn of the century. He did have some writings about alcohol, saying, "Oh, alcohol, so it makes you say yes to things. Like it's sort of like say yes to life." He had that, but he was also a big fan of nitrous oxide too. But But, people have talked that the Oracle at Delphi may have also been inhaling nitrous fumes. There's all kinds of different, everybody has different brains too.
Thank you for your time. It's just great. Thank you for your great work.
You're welcome, of course. All right.
As you've just heard, there's a long history across many cultures of people using psilocybin to help with their spiritual and mental well-being. And it appears that Western medicine is just starting to take notice. But as Dr. Aggarwal's legal fight with the FDA shows us, it's not just doctors and scientists that need to be convinced, it's bureaucracies. But in Canada, significant strides have been made. In February of 2022, Canada amended its food and drug regulations to allow the use of psilocybin-assisted therapy for the terminally ill, for patients who are understandably going through significant emotional distress. Our next guest will tell us about our acute anxiety surrounding death and how it often is rooted in the unfinished business of our emotional lives. We close this episode with Dr. Bruce Tobin. Dr. Tobin is a psychotherapist, a registered clinical counselor, and also the founder and chair of the not-for-profit Theasil, which is a coalition of healthcare professionals dedicated to helping Canadians receive therapeutic access to psilocybin. In Dr. Tobin's work, he performed the first ever legal psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy in Canada. Let's listen to Dr. Tobin as he beautifully takes us through the experience.
I think one important thing to really bear in mind about psychedelic therapy is that it's not so much about what the mushrooms do to you. It's about the kind of inner emotional work that you're able to do with the assistance of the mushrooms. In the therapeutic use of psilocybin, we want to completely internalize the experience. That is, we're going to mask out all exterior sound and sight with the use of eye shades that the individual will wear throughout the session. And with psilocybin, the session could be anywhere from about 3.5 to 5 hours. They're going to be listening to music throughout, and that playlist is going to be ideally calibrated to evoke the emotions and issues which are important to the client to have come out. Because in this experience, we are encouraging our patients to deeply relax and open up. Open up emotionally, cognitively, somatically, that is with their body. There's a loosening of the kind of neuromuscular tension that we all carry from day to day, year to year through our lives. We carry a lot of road dust, whoever we are. And if we have had difficult or injurious experiences early in life, many of us are walking through life with a kind of a ball and chain around our ankle, carrying a lot of baggage that we would feel so much better if we could let go of. So to some extent, how deep we go into the psychedelic experience will depend partly on the dose. That is, we know that at very light doses, we have a sort of an increase in our sensory awareness. Colors become more brilliant or intense. Music becomes more beautiful. And as we get into higher doses, we get into what we might call a biographical dose. And that is the dose level in which we start to reflect on our lives and on our past, either positive or negative situations come up. Our memory is greatly enhanced. Memories flood in. And then, so that's the level in which we may encounter, in a therapeutic sense, things like relationship dysfunctions. And in working with the end-of-life patients, what I saw was what was primarily important to them, which was what I would call the resolution of their primary love relationships. That is, preparation for death in the psychedelic process tended not to be so much an encounter with some abstract capital D death, so much as focusing on the importance of healing in their relationships between family members, in terms of forgiveness, atonement, coming together, getting past old hurdles and mistakes and hurts, and coming to a place of peace with the people that we most share love with. I mean, I have seen results from this treatment that are truly humbling and almost staggering, because one of my patients was very near death from cancer. She only had several days to, or a week or so, projected to live. Her doctor had referred her to me because I remember her doctor saying, "I have thrown everything I have at this patient's pain and nothing is cutting it." Her pain was so bad that we needed to have some pain medication, some very strong pain medication available to her. And she wept through most of her session. I didn't see any dramatic breakthroughs or outcomes that day. But the next day, her doctor phones me at 9 a.m. "Bruce, there's been an incredible turnaround. She is now virtually pain-free, and she's off her medications. She's now present to her family, and she's cracking jokes with them." And and she says, and the other thing, she's lost her fear of death. And the following day, she messaged her friends, her close friends. They came over and said goodbye. The family gathered around her bed, just as they had less than a week before with the psilocybin. And she went peacefully and with dignity. And I walked out of that hospital with a feeling of tremendous elation that I had witnessed a truly good death.
It's hard not to be both moved and convinced by Dr. Tobin, and it's hard not to root for Dr. Aggarwal in his fight to legalize psilocybin-aided therapy for the people who are terminally ill. But for me, it's hard not to think about what this therapy might mean for people who aren't currently facing death, for just people living their lives. After all, we know that we're going to die someday, maybe hopefully not soon, and so will everyone else we love. Shouldn't people who can safely take part in a similar therapy be able to? Don't we all want to better connect with people we love for however long we have?